Hi, I'm William Spaniel. Let's talk about voting. Evidently, there's an election going on in the United States right now, so it's a good time to be talking about this. And specifically today, I want to talk about what we call the paradox of voting in political science. And to kick things off, I want to ask you a question. So in the discussion section or the comment section of this video, I want you to answer this question: why do you vote? That's, of course, assuming that you vote. If you don't vote, then you can go ahead and tell me why you don't vote. But suppose you do vote, then tell me why it is that you choose to go to the ballots or to the polls every year and cast your vote. Go ahead and do that now. And as it turns out, there are a lot of good reasons why you should vote, but there's a particularly bad one, and that's why we have what we call the paradox of voting, and that's what I'm going to be addressing in this video, is this bad reason. To start off, I'm going to make a few observations about voting. First is that your vote rarely matters. So suppose I prefer President Obama to be reelected and not have Mitt Romney as the president of the United States. If that's the case, and Obama's getting 2 million votes and Romney's only getting 1 million, then it's pretty clear that my vote doesn't matter here, because the margin of victory is very, very large. Obama's winning by 1 million votes, so my particular vote doesn't matter. Likewise, if you switch things around and you give Romney 2 million votes and Obama's only getting 1 million votes, my vote still doesn't matter, because even if I just sit at home, Obama's still going to lose. If I vote, he's still going to lose. Doesn't matter what I do, Obama's going to lose in this situation. But what's really interesting is that even when things are really, really close, as long as they're not perfectly close, my vote still doesn't matter. So if Obama gets 1.5 million plus 1 votes and Romney gets 1.5 million minus 1 votes, my vote still doesn't matter. If I sit at home instead of voting for Obama in this situation, then Obama goes from 1.5 million plus 1 to exactly 1.5 million votes. And you'll notice that 1.5 million votes is still sufficient for Obama to win, because Romney is getting 1.5 million minus 1 votes. And so as a result, your vote only matters if your vote will cause or break a tie in the election. So my vote matters in this situation if there are exactly 1.5 million Obama voters and exactly 1.5 million Romney voters. If I vote, I break the tie and give Obama the election. If I don't vote, then the election is a tie because they're both getting 1.5 million votes, and Romney is probably going to win this because in the United States, the House of Representatives breaks the tie, and it's probably going to be a Republican House of Representatives, which would in turn vote for Romney in the tiebreaker. So my vote only matters if I'm causing or breaking a tie in the election. And moreover, sometimes, this is observation number 2, your vote is completely irrelevant. So for me personally, I'm registered to vote in California, and I live in New York. I go to grad school in Rochester, New York. So those are the 2 places that I could conceivably vote. I could either keep my registration in California, or I could switch my registration to New York. But either way, my vote doesn't matter here. If the vote is close in California or New York, these are 2 very, very blue states that always go Democrat, then Obama has definitely lost the election, because he's really unpopular in California and he's really unpopular in New York. And if he's really unpopular in those 2 places, he's even more unpopular elsewhere. So it's definitely the case that at that point, if my vote is even close to being tied or it's close to breaking a tie in California or New York, then Obama has lost the election elsewhere. And I can't change that by voting in California or New York. So in this particular case, my vote is completely irrelevant. In contrast, your vote might be important if you have a chance of being relevant in a swing state like Ohio or Florida or so forth. But even then, from observation 1, then you're in the situation where your vote is still only important when there's a close to being a tie or exactly a tie, when your vote is actually pivotal in that you're either causing a tie or breaking a tie. And the likelihood of that is pretty darn marginal. The last observation that I'm going to make here is that voting is costly. It takes time to go to the polls, it takes time to register for an absentee ballot, and so forth. You could be doing other things with your time that you might actually find entertaining, or you could spend another hour at work, or something to that effect. And if you want to vote competently, then there's this other cost here that you actually have to invest time in learning which alternative is better. Is it really better for me if Mitt Romney is the president of the United States? Is it really better for me if Barack Obama is the president of the United States? And so forth. So if you really want to vote in a way that you think is actually going to help you out, you have to spend some time, you have to pay a cost to learn about the candidates, which in turn shoots up this cost of voting even higher. And so if we take these observations and we form a voter utility model, we're going to see something pretty interesting, i.e. that it really doesn't make very much sense to go out and vote if you're trying to swing the election. So let O be the value for Obama being president. Let R be the value for Romney being president. Let P be the probability of your vote actually mattering. And let C be the cost of voting for you. Then you should not vote if the following holds. If the cost of your going to the ballot box or going to the polls and voting is higher than the probability of your vote actually mattering, times the difference in your value for Obama and Romney. This is if you prefer Obama, but of course it goes the same way the other way around. If you prefer Romney, then you just switch these two things around. So the probability of you mattering times the value of Obama to you minus the value of Romney to you, the difference in value of having one guy being the president versus the other guy being the president. Well, if we go back and we think about what these values are, these values could be actually pretty large, because you might actually really prefer Obama to Romney, or you might really prefer Romney to Obama. But the problem is that this probability right here, the probability that you are going to either cause a tie or break a tie, is virtually zero. You can think back to even like the closest election that any of us can remember in the president of the United States, or in the history of the presidential elections, which was in Florida in 2000. Even then, the margin of victory was something around 250 in favor of George W. Bush. And so even in this really, really close situation, it's still the case that those people's votes didn't matter because there was such a large margin of victory. Even though 250 doesn't sound like a lot, as long as it's more than one, it doesn't matter. So this P right here is tiny, and which means this is basically going to zero right here. The value of this is zero, and you have a positive cost, so it's almost certain that this cost of you going out and voting is greater than this. And so it doesn't make sense for you to vote if all you're trying to do is sway the outcome of the election. Now, a common response you'll hear to this paradox of voting is that, well, it's this. But if everyone thought this way, no one would vote, and my vote would matter. And what they're saying is true. If everyone did think this way, that, well, my cost of voting is more expensive to me than the likelihood I'm going to sway the outcome of the election times the value of the difference of the candidates, if people all thought that, then no one would go out and vote. But if no one is going out and voting, then all I have to do is go out and vote, and I'll pay a small little cost, but this probability that I'm pivotal, that actually my vote matters, is going to be almost certain, and so it's actually worth it for me in that case. So what this is saying is true. It's factually true. If everyone thought that way, no one would go and vote, and my vote would in fact matter. But the issue is that, well, people don't actually think this way. In fact, very, very, very few of people think this way. It's basically, political scientists and anyone who's watching this video right now. Keep in mind that voting is strategic. You can only affect your action. You can't affect the actions of everybody else. And so given that millions of people are unaware of this fact, or they go ahead and like voting anyway for some of the reasons I'm going to describe in a second, then your vote is almost certainly irrelevant. And so, yes, it's true that if everyone thought this way, your vote would become important, but it's not true that people actually do think this way, and so your vote is irrelevant. So if you're trying to sway the outcome of the election, you're not going to be doing that by voting. It doesn't make sense for you to vote if that's what you're trying to do. And so we call this the paradox of voting because individual votes are irrelevant, at least in terms of trying to decide the election, and yet millions and millions and millions of people vote. So the paradox here is to explain the discrepancy, where it doesn't really look like it makes sense that people vote, and yet people do it anyway. So why is that? What causes this discrepancy? And I can offer you a few different explanations for why we still see people voting. First, you might be married to one of the candidates, at which point you need to go ahead and vote, otherwise you're going to be kicked out of the family. I actually knew the son of, this guy's mother was running for governor, and I'm pretty sure he voted in that election because he didn't want to be kicked out of the family. So that's a good reason why you should vote. But that only applies to a few people. A more general reason why people vote is that people feel a patriotic duty to vote. It's sort of your civic duty to go out there and go to the ballot box and actually cast your vote. So that's one reason. And the way we actually sort of model this is by adding what we call the duty term. This is your civic duty or patriotic duty to vote. And so you should not vote if the cost of you voting is greater than this probability that you're pivotal times the difference of the quality of the candidates plus this duty term. Well, even if this goes to zero, as long as you feel sufficient patriotic duty for voting, then it makes sense that this is going to be larger than this cost value. This duty is going to be worth more to you than the cost, and so you go ahead and vote anyway. So that's one of the popular explanations, is that people just feel like a civic duty that they have to do this, that it's their patriotic duty to do this, and so that's why they go and vote. So that's one sensible reason why people vote. Another issue is that people might just feel like they like to express themselves, and this is a good way of doing it. So this sort of explains why people will go out and vote, even for candidates that we know aren't going to win. So the Green Party candidate is certainly not going to win the election this year, but people are going to go ahead and vote for him anyway. So they like to express themselves in this sort of manner, and so that's why they're willing to pay this cost to go ahead and express themselves, even though their vote won't actually matter. So that's another reason why people vote. And then the last reason that people might not vote is that people just don't understand the probability of being pivotal is virtually zero. So there are definitely people out there who think that their vote is going to affect the outcome of the election or has a good chance of affecting the outcome of the election, when that's really not true. So this isn't an argument that people are clearly irrational. It's just that the voting process is something that people do very, very infrequently, maybe once a year, more likely once every other year or once every 4 years when there's a presidential election. And so that being the case, it really doesn't make much sense for these sorts of people to go ahead and sit down and spend a lot of time thinking about, well, what is the chances that I'm going to be pivotal? Because they take this action so infrequently, it's not worth the cost to them to go ahead and try to think about what is rational. They just go ahead and use a rule of thumb to work through this irrationality without actually doing any sort of math. So this isn't irrationality directly. It's rational in the fact that you have to pay to be rational, or to act rational or behave rationally. And so people are not willing to pay this sort of cost to learn this information because they don't vote frequently. Whereas if votes were held every single day, people would very quickly learn that they don't actually have very high chances of being pivotal, and then that would in turn cause them to vote less frequently. But that's not the case. We only vote once every year or every 4 years, and so people aren't really learning this very well. All right, that is the paradox of voting and a few responses to why people vote anyway. And that wraps up this video. I conclude by noting that there are probably Obama and Romney ads running next to this video, given that we are 2 weeks away from the election, and I laugh out loud about that. So thank you for watching this. You can click over here to subscribe to my videos, and if you do that, I will see you next time. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.